Okay, this was a really nice crowd, very good crowd to support Vermont filmmaking, especially important Vermont filmmaking, so thank you for coming out. I've seen these films before, but seeing them together was a very good experience for me. And I think they reveal quite interesting issues, important, vital issues that we face in Vermont, but there's also a universal quality to them, because just because they were shot here doesn't mean that Dan couldn't have gone to another town and found a similar situation to document, or that Duane couldn't have chosen another waterway, maybe not as significant as Lake Champlain, to document what is really happening as we lose our precious waterways. So let me start with you, Dan. For background, so everybody knows this was your senior thesis film, is that correct?
Yeah, it was.
Just want you all to notice that. Many of you also know that Dan was my videography intern last year, and Dan has enormous skills as a filmmaker, which are manifesting early, and we anticipate great things from him going forward. Tell us about how this was something you conceived, and what motivated you to go and tackle a fairly challenging subject.
Yeah, I set out to make a completely different film, actually. I wanted to study, I had heard from various friends and activists who I knew about people doing mutual aid in the Vermont area during the pandemic. If you don't know, it's the anarchist concept of just doing what you can to help your community through direct action and distribution of resources. And I wanted to study it, and I wanted to explore it because people were going out of their way to deliver groceries to each other, or like providing medical supplies where they could, just doing little things wherever they had the resources to help. And I started following that thread, and it had no plot, and I kind of was about a month into it, and I went, this is interesting and I like it, but there's nothing, there's no stakes. And then many of those people who I was following, like Sam Bliss, who you saw in the interview, became some of the early protesters at Sears Lane and said, oh, you should come with us to this. It's a great example of what you're looking to study. And my story completely pivoted, and I started getting really into the story of the people of Sears Lane.
Well, there's a great deal of currency in this because a lot of it was shot in November, in the fall of last year. There's one thing that came up on the screen at the end about the 30 pod houses that were going to be built. What do you know about that?
I haven't heard much other than that they're still under construction.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good idea. It's something that I hope, really, really do hope comes to great fruition, but it's one of those things that, they destroyed housing these folks currently had for the promise of something in the future that could be ideal, and this site remains to be seen whether or not it'll live up to that hype, and it remains to be seen whether or not that nonprofit management will respect these people's rights, because people in nonprofits manage the hotels for cold weather housing, and that, from what I've heard from many of these homeless people, is a very degrading experience. You're sectioned off in a wing of the hotel, and you have typically security or police watching you. You're only allowed to leave for certain hours of the day, only allowed to socialize with certain people. So I hope that the pods are a great solution, but I want to see them first.
Mm-hmm. I also want to mention, I thought you did a nice job of being in two places. One is in the camp and sort of giving full throat to the protests and sort of the difficulties, the challenges, and the other was inside the Burlington City Council, where we could observe how the sausage gets made and what the nature of debate is. Tell me, you came in maybe with a neutral attitude about what you might find at the end of the experience. Because I thought you presented a fairly neutral, I think both, whatever the multiple sides of the argument were here, you showed them well. Did you come away with something that moved you in the end, like, hey, I'm glad I did this because?
Yeah, definitely. Because in the end, for me, my politics can be described as something left of center, as most people my age, but I try to do justice to everybody who was kind enough to give me their time and express their opinion. But the thing that I took away from it is that many of these counselors who were trying to evict the encampment, they have a logic in which they're the heroes of the story, in which they are providing better, long-term housing to these folks. But in the short term, they're demolishing homes. And you see these anarchists who are, they're very radical. They use a lot of language that kind of is scary or might, make some people clutch pearls, let's say. But at the end of the day, they go out of their way to give all that they can to give food to people in need. And it kind of got to me in a real way that your politics and your rhetoric, you can be an individually nice person. When I met with these counselors one-on-one, they were great, kind people to me. They were fantastic, but their politics had a real effect in the world. And these other people who I met who were told to avoid, every time I mentioned anarchists, I got a certain look about me. They were kind and generous in a way that I had not encountered, in a way that they put really actively into practice.
Duane, let's go to you. My comment about this is a good film at 40 minutes. This is a good film in terms of, it could have been longer, but then again, you guys managed this, you put a lot into 40 minutes. The technique was great. There's drones, there's also there's good close-ups. And then the subject matter, it's not a simple environmental film at all. It covers it beautifully, but there's also the interviews with people are astonishing, some of them. They're really good, and they're quite diverse. I'd like to know, first of all, where were you, because you're co-directing, are you shooting this while Jordan is rowing, is kayaking? Where are you? You're in the boat ahead?
Yeah.
I'm just curious about the technique, because it's very good.
Good question. Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it. So the original idea for this film, Jordan approached me with it, and he said, let's canoe the length of Lake Champlain. We'll do it together. And I kind of thought about that, pretty quickly realized that if I were to do that, I would mostly be filming the back of his head, and that might not be super conducive to...
A little more experimental.
Perhaps. So no, I followed along in a small inflatable dinghy, had a little 4-horsepower motor on it. So I was on the water with Jordan for most of the trip, following along and filming from that small boat.
What was it like in the rain? Because it rained for 3 straight days. So
those were some of the days
did the dinghy fill up?
It was an old dinghy. We didn't have a lot of money to produce this film, so that was one of the corners that we cut. Got a dinghy off of Craigslist, and it was taking on water the entire time. I think it was mostly safe. I'm not a big boat person, so I don't have a lot of experience on the water. So that was quite a learning curve and experience there. The rainy days were the handful of days that I was not on the boat, not on the water with him. So all that is GoPro footage that he recorded in the field on his own.
Oh, I see. So what's your feeling having tackled this project? What was your sort of knowledge level going in, both you and Jordan, and coming out? Clearly, the impression one gets is that there's an immense amount of information and knowledge that's conveyed during the course of these 2 weeks. Is that true? Did you feel like, did it change you?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So Jordan and I both grew up in Essex, Vermont, just a few miles from Lake Champlain. And neither of us really knew much about the lake at the beginning of this project. Despite growing up so close to it, visiting the Burlington waterfront, it was always kind of something pretty to look at, a beautiful place to go, and kind of understand it as a view or a vista. It wasn't until this film that either of us really started to learn about some of the serious issues, and also the wide variety of people that call this basin home, that are actively working to improve it. We learned a lot. I still by no means consider myself a lake expert. I think there's a lot more to learn. But what we learned through this film, and what we hope that the film conveys, is that there's tremendous value in just getting out there in terms of meeting people, all your neighbors who are here sharing this basin with you, but also experiencing the lake for yourself. It's an extraordinarily beautiful place, a place with a lot of challenges, but also a lot of potential, a lot of really wonderful experiences to be had there. And I think that the more that we can collectively do that, the better. That will be important as we go ahead.
Well, there were some signs of optimism as you watched the film. The family that stopped dairy and went to maple sugaring, I think that's really important. Because the amount of phosphorus. I mean, she also articulates the notion that farmers take a lot of blame for this. But the last more than 5 years, the state and farmers have worked together quite a bit to create buffer zones, to create ways to spread out the runoff of phosphorus. So, but it will take time because the aggregated amount of phosphorus over all these years is so huge. But I thought there was some optimism in your film. Would you agree? And if so, how did that sort of impress upon you as you went through it?
Absolutely, yeah. So the farmer that you're describing towards the end is Karen Fortin, and I think she's a great example of what it looks like to adapt and to change and to embrace, different possibilities and different kind of ways of doing things that might be healthier for everybody involved. I do think that, I do have hope. I do think that coming away from this film, it's hard. We're looking out on this humongous toxic cyanobacteria bloom. It's hard to look at that and think that.
Did that shock you, by the way?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we planned the trip for late August, knowing that that's kind of when the blooms are the worst, and thinking that maybe we'd be able to showcase some of it. We had no idea what to expect, and we heard from some locals that was the biggest and most intense bloom that they had seen in recent memory. So yeah, that was not. And it's hard to look at that and think that it can be any other way, or that we could address this and prevent this in the future. But at the same time, we met a lot of people who were doing really important work and working hard at it and putting everything that they had into trying to change things. And so I do think that that's hopeful, and I think that there are a lot of people out there who are doing important work, and I think that they need help. They need everybody's involvement, and if we all come together, I do think that we can change the course that we're on.
Well, there's hope in the fact. I mean, I can just give you just a quick personal example. When I was a boy, growing up in Rochester, New York, Lake Ontario, which was a tremendous resource for so many people, but in my teen years, they closed it because of industrial pollution, and it took them decades to get it back open. But it did get back open. The same thing can be talked about at Lake Erie. These are massive bodies of water, but once they start tipping in the other direction, it takes a long time to get it righted. Was that the biggest bloom, or were there other blooms that you found? That was largely focused in that one area up in the bay?
Yeah, good question. So the cyanobacteria blooms are heavily weather dependent. They come after heavy periods of rain followed by hot, still days. And so there was sort of a perfect storm, if you will, the right conditions to make that bloom. Mm-hmm. The Missisquoi Bay also happens to be extremely shallow. Mm-hmm. So it warms up quickly. Cyanobacteria is mostly seen in the northern parts of the lake, Missisquoi Bay or St. Albans Bay. And so that's really the only place that we did see it. For the majority of the trip, the first half, it was clear water. It was beautiful until then.
Let's go to the audience, please. Who has questions for these guys? Questions? Yes, go ahead.
First of all, Dan, I can't remember when in the last few years, but there was a short film shown about over-policing in a town right near here.
Yes.
And I thought this was could be an interesting companion piece, because there was a whole lot about the people in the town, and then the elected officials, and also the people who the elected officials tell to. Do you remember that film, Lauren?
That was The Price of Safety by Chris Spencer.
That's right.
Okay,
and the town was Virgins.
It was. I wasn't going to say it was Virginia. I couldn't remember, but I thought these two would be terrific together. It sounds like it influenced you.
Oh, yeah, it did quite a bit. His wife actually appeared in another film of mine that I had earlier about how the Middlebury area dealt with COVID, and he and I have actually been in touch and had a lot of conversations about this sort of thing. And he currently has a project in the works, which I did some additional photography for, about how Vermont is codifying Roe v. Wade into its constitution and how that's coming up. So you all have that to look forward to. I'm sure that'll be premiering around here soon.
The unfortunate part is that by coming here this morning, you missed Chris Spencer's new film called The Life of Stephen Bates. It's an 8-minute short about the first black sheriff in Vermont, Stephen Bates, who was served, I think, 22 years, was reelected, and this was in the 1800s. It's an 8-minute short, and it did win the Shouldice Family Prize for Best Vermont Film. So I'm sorry that some of you wouldn't see it, but I suspect Chris will get it out there. And thank you for being the collective memory of the Middlebury New Filmmakers Festival. If you come long enough, you can get all stored in your brain.
I have another one that I thought of during your film, Dan, which was the one about and it wasn't local, but it was about men who were alcoholics And it was housing that, well, they were choosing to keep drinking.
Yes.
Pretty much until they died.
Yes, it was called Wet House.
Right, and that was also about mutual aid, but more institutionalized, more like what these people were trying to avoid. I'm not saying these people were alcoholics, it was just that institutions that you think are housing people are really not necessarily housing.
Who else?
And
Yeah.
I just want to say one other thing, at 40 minutes, I'm sure this wasn't an accident, this is a perfect length of film to show in a high school or middle school class.
I appreciate you saying that. We are taking this on a basin-wide tour, and if there are any educators or people involved in organizations here who would like to organize a screening, it's not online now, but we are focusing on in-person screenings, gathering people together around this film, so if you're interested, we'd love to speak with you.
Yes.
Lloyd,
This is,
from the past 5 years, you could put together the most amazing Vermont-focused film festival just with your alums. You've got the film from Virgins, you've got the farmer down in, was it
Peter and the Farm.
You could put together the most amazing 2 hours in the world, really.
Are you asking me to do that directly? Can somebody create a 26-hour day schedule? But no, it's a great idea. I don't mean to be facetious. It's a great idea. We have been lucky, and there are.
Amazing Vermont-centered films by, somewhat by design. I know you look for that. On the photography on Lake Champlain, stunning. And one irony that I would point out is that the drone photography on the bacteria bloom, it was as if the kayak was going on some crazy green marble. The irony of that being so stunningly beautiful.
Yes.
For all the wrong reasons.
Exactly. Yes.
It was all of the photography that was just really impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, we were stunned when we saw the footage that was coming from that drone. I've heard it described as the toxic sublime. There is a certain beauty in some of these toxic landscapes, and we kind of stumbled upon that.
Absolutely stunning.
Thank you.
Yes.
This is kind of in the cinematography. When you were doing the time lapse, I think you're down near the Champlain Bridge area, the clouds are all going by. I noticed that the camera shot, I guess you call it, was changing the horizon, kept coming up, you could just barely see the far edge of the lake, and then it stopped. Is that done during editing, or how do you move your time-lapse photography without making it jiggly and go up like that?
Yeah, that in that case was done in post. That was a big, I think, 5K shot that we cropped in on and zoomed and did a pan in editing. There are devices that you can use for that, but we did it in editing. Yeah.
A lot can happen in post. A lot can happen. Questions? Yes.
I saw Charm Circle last night.
Yes.
And Dan's film and the pictures of the camp that really questioned your sensibility of, clean and nice means everything is okay. And people who are dirty, there's something wrong with them. And I really felt that same sense of trying to put our middle class values on the people who are living in the camp, and that they're human and they're doing what they want to do, and we're trying to push them aside because they're encroaching on our pretty theater and our pretty movie. That came across.
I also wish I had done a better job of centering the camp in Burlington. The Sears Lane encampment, they picked a wooded lot that was kind of on the backside of a few different storefronts, but half mile, maybe a little less down the road. And they actively were trying to avoid suburbanites for that exact purpose. And I mean, if you look, they, with the lack of resources they had, they built 2-story houses. I'm not sure if you saw that tower. That was strangely structurally sound. They had, heat, and Sereno, who you saw his cabin, had insulation. They had a community kitchen. They had a porta potty that they were able to use. Somebody managed to scrounge up a collection of money to get a dumpster into the encampment that they paid for with their own money to dispose of waste. They were trying their hardest to, not be perfectly clean, as you said, but to be sanitary and livable. But whenever people went there, all they saw was the trash. All they saw was the materials they were able to find to make these houses.
I do think we've all been inculcated over the years with cleanliness being next to godliness. And we have certain preconceptions about what and how things should look. Yeah.
Speaking about a lot can happen during a post, I don't mean to be to create an embarrassment, but in just about every shot, I think, from every camera you use, I noticed like a smudgy kind of thing in the middle of the screen. It kind of went down.
The screen's dirty.
Oh, that not film screen.
The language schools were in here for the better part of 8 weeks, and the Twilight was used extensively. And I don't know what happened. I noticed this too today, and given the sort of backdrop, especially the closing shot, it was apparent. And we don't really know how to clean the screen without making it worse. And college will have to deal with that, so we apologize. Who else has a question? That's it? Okay, well, first of all, we have plenty of time, which did not run too late today because guys had shorter films. A couple of programming notes for you. We have mentioned that the ASEF Prize screenings are going to happen today at Town Hall Theater. That's the American Indonesian Cultural and Educational Foundation. We'll have a filmmaker from Indonesia who is here from the Bali International Film Festival, and will be joined by several members of the delegation from the Consulate General of the Republic of Indonesia. That film is called Preman, and it is his first film. It was selected by the Bali International to be their ASEF Prize winner. And Middlebury has selected a film called Pasang, In the Shadow of Everest. That film will screen at 2 o'clock. It's a documentary by Nancy Svensson, and she will be here. So if you're interested in sort of the cross-cultural exchange of filmmakers, come to see that. That's just a programming note, but something near and dear to our heart. Otherwise, the schedule is chock full of stuff today. Please enjoy yourselves. If the weather holds, we will have a happy hour outdoors at the Stone Mill for festival pass holders. And it seems to be getting better out there. 1 second. And then we'll have a nighttime party back at Stone Mill featuring some music from the Morning Dudes. And there's food provided by Grapevine Grill at 5 o'clock and by Sabai Sabai at 9 o'clock. So we try to feed the people.